You're watching BBC World News. Let's just take you back to Iran. Iran TV broadcasting these pictures live from Kerman, the birthplace of General Qasem Soleimani, the 62-year-old leader of Al-Quds force, the Black Ops force answerable directly to the Iranian Supreme Leader Khomeini. And Friday prayers here and demonstrations taking place against the assassination, the targeted killing in a drone attack at Baghdad International Airport a few hours ago. The consequences of this action by Donald Trump as yet to be seen, but it's difficult to overstate just what an escalation and how significant the killing of General Soleimani is in terms of the Middle East and the proxy wars fought between Iran and the Gulf states and America and Israel in the region. Bibi Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, has cut short a visit to Greece and is returning home. Plenty more to come, of course, here on BBC World News and on the website. From me, Tim Wilcox, and the team. See you soon. Hello. In a dramatic escalation of tensions in the Middle East, a US airstrike has killed Iran's most important military commander. General Qasem Soleimani was the commander of the Quds force of Iran's elite Revolutionary Guards. They are responsible for Iranian foreign military operations and answer directly to the country's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Well, General Soleimani, who for many was seen as a charismatic national hero at home, was one of several people killed by a US drone strike as he travelled in a convoy near Baghdad's international airport. Iran has declared 3 days of national mourning and promised harsh vengeance. The Pentagon says the operation was carried out at the direction of President Trump. Well, Mr. Trump has not yet directly commented, but he printed this image of the American flag, the Stars and Stripes, at the top of his Twitter feed. We begin our coverage now with this report by John Donnison.
This is all that was left of a convoy of cars carrying Iran's most senior military commander. His killing by the United States will shake the Middle East to the core. Qasem Soleimani was head of the elite Quds force of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard and a hugely influential figure in the region. In a statement, the Pentagon said the airstrike had been carried out at the direction of the president and that the US military had taken decisive defensive action to protect US personnel abroad. The immediate aftermath of the attack, which happened near Baghdad International Airport, was filmed by passers-by. Several other people with military ties to Iran were also killed. It comes in a week where simmering tensions between Iran and the US have boiled over. The American embassy in Baghdad has been under siege as pro-Iranian militiamen and demonstrators tried to breach its walls, angry at US airstrikes in the region. And yesterday, the US Defense Secretary hinted America might take further action against Iran.
I think it's important at this point in time to not make this a United States versus Iran issue. It's really Iran versus the world. It's Iranian bad behavior that has been going on now for nearly 40 years.
Last night, more than 650 US troops arrived in neighbouring Kuwait to provide reinforcements. All eyes will be on Iran's response. In a region already riven with conflict, some will fear this could mean another war in the Middle East. John Donnison, BBC News.
Well, let's speak to our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette, who joins us from Kabul now. Lise, it's difficult to overstate the significance, potentially, of this killing.
Yes, and for now it is a war of words, with Iranian officials making it clear that this is an act of war in their view. The supreme leader Ayatollah Khamenei and both the defense minister have vowed there would be a crushing response, severe retaliation. For now, Iran's focus is there's 3 days of public mourning. They've had a top-level security meeting, and they will want to organize a massive public funeral for Qasem Soleimani to send a message to Iran and statement to the world that this was an act which carried huge consequences for the United States in the region and beyond.
A charismatic man at home, a national hero. Just explain how important he was within the hierarchy of Iranian leadership.
Qasem Soleimani first came to attention with his brave exploits during the Iran-Iraq War of the 1980s, and since the late 1990s he's headed this elite Quds force of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards, and he has risen to be not just Iran's most important military figure, but also a charismatic political personality inside Iran, regarded as second only to Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei. There was even speculation last year that he could be a possible future political leader, but mostly in the region he's been, well, keeping his head down. He's a very mysterious character who keeps turning up when there are major covert operations in the region, where he was responsible for creating and orchestrating a network of proxy militias in Iraq, in Lebanon, in Syria, and beyond. But he also used to taunt the United States, taking selfies with the troops with the pro-Iranian forces on front lines, sending barbs on social media directly to Donald Trump. The United States over the years has repeatedly considered taking on Qasem Soleimani with a targeted killing, but one president after another decided it would just be a step too far with too much consequences, would be seen as a provocation. We're waiting to see now what was the decision-making process which led President Trump to take an act which seems to go against everything he has said all through 2019, saying he didn't want a war with Iran, that while tensions were escalating, he wanted to end what he called the endless wars for the United States. And now he has unleashed a new dangerous chapter. Iran will certainly retaliate. How, when, and where it still remains to be seen, but it will be at a moment of its choosing, and to send a very strong message to the United States.
And the catalyst for this might well have been perhaps the attack on the US embassy in Iraq. But worth pointing out, at least, that General Soleimani played a very important role as a US ally in the fight against Islamic State in Iraq.
Yes, there have been moments over the years where their interests were aligned, where it's true that Qasem Soleimani's forces in Iraq and Syria played a crucial role in the campaign against Islamic State, and we always wondered at the time whether this would lead to a kind of a rapprochement, a kind of a de facto kind of cooperation, but they remained largely on parallel tracks. I'm in Afghanistan, where many Afghans, many of them forced went to fight in militias in Syria, the Fatah Mayun, that were created by Qasem Soleimani in the battle there to keep President Assad and his government in power. So he wielded enormous influence. And so the question now is, what kind of revenge will those thousands and thousands of proxy militias want to exact, and what kind of weapons will they be in the hands of the commanders who will now succeed Qasem Soleimani and will want to take revenge for a man who had cult status within their ranks, although for the United States, Qasem Soleimani was a cunning adversary, but certainly for them, the face of evil in the region.
And as you say, I mean, pressure on Iran to respond will be immense. But when it comes to the sort of response Iran might take, I mean, so many wars start with miscalculations right around the world, don't they? I mean, could this be seen as a miscalculation by the United States, do you think, in the long run, or what is your view?
Well, it's still early hours in the United States. You've had statements on both sides of the House, from Democrats and Republicans, expressing support for this operation, describing Qasem Soleimani as an evil mastermind. But questions are also being asked about Who took the decision? What was the decision-making process? Does the United States now have the capacity to deal with this kind of crisis, an enormous crisis, after what has been months under the Trump administration of hollowing out the State Department, the National Security Council, the kind of usual decision-making process which will be marshaled at a time of crisis like this? And President Trump simply does not have that same kind of apparatus, and certainly in other capitals too, in Britain, in Canada, in Germany, who also have forces on the ground. They'll be asking who took this decision, what was the reasoning, and what preparations for the expected retaliation. Just very last, Dominic Raab, the British Foreign Secretary, has now called for de-escalation.
Okay, all right, Lisa Set in Kabul, thank you very much. Well, Iran's state TV channel has reported the death of General Soleimani. This was how the item was shown on a news bulletin, with the presenter confirming the death, and then a montage of images of the head of the Al-Quds forces. Iran's Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif has also commented on Twitter. He said the killing of General Soleimani was an extremely dangerous and foolish escalation. He added the US bears responsibility for all consequences of its rogue adventurism. While the killing of General Soleimani has put a direct strain on relations between the US and Iran, there has also been reaction from Iraq, where the US military strike took place. The influential Shia cleric Muqtada al-Sadr, who rejects both American and Iranian influence in Iraq, said he mourned the death and called on his followers to be ready to protect their country. There was also this reaction, though, to the news in Baghdad's central Tahrir Square, where a group of Iraqis appeared to celebrate General Soleimani's death by waving a giant Iraqi flag. US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo tweeted similar pictures, saying they showed Iraqis dancing in the streets for freedom, thankful that General Soleimani is no more. Well, our Middle East correspondent Quentin Somerville is in Beirut. He gave us the reaction from there.
Well, there's been outrage from Hezbollah and Iranian supporters here in Lebanon. It's hard to really overestimate the reach that Qasem Soleimani had across the Middle East. Every single battlefield, his name was either mentioned or his presence was felt. This was a general who reshaped the countries around him. His power went far beyond just military matters. He served Iran's interest in Lebanon, in Iraq, in Syria and elsewhere, brutally and efficiently, and he leaves a bloody legacy in all of those countries. So this is an extremely bold action that the United States has taken. And for many years, it was thought that the United States or Israel might target Qasem Soleimani, but they didn't, because he was untouchable, because the consequences of assassinating him would just be so terrible. Now, Iran has said it will that there will be severe consequences for his assassination, and it will take revenge. And America, of course, is saying that all Americans should now leave Iraq, but the power of Iran to hit back against this attack against them, it extends far beyond Iraq. US interests and its allies, Britain and others, will be at more risk now, not just in the Middle East, but across the world. Iranian proxies, whether they're in Iraq or whether they're in Iran or whether they're here in Lebanon, have been pretty busy in the past few years. The war in Syria has taken up a huge number of resources, but it undoubtedly will still maintain the flexibility to be able to use those resources to strike elsewhere and strike at other targets. And there is a sense here in the Middle East that Americans and others now have an even larger target on their back than they did before the killing of Qasem Soleimani.
Quentin Somerville reporting there from Beirut. You are live with Tim Wilcox. Much more to come. Let's get more now on our main news this hour. The killing of the senior Iranian General Qasem Soleimani in a targeted drone strike in Baghdad at the international airport there at the hands of the US military. Let's hear from Iran now and reaction from some residents in Tehran. These interviews filmed by the Agence France Presse news agency AFP.
Mr. Trump's actions were unfortunate. He said we won't go towards war, but he did push the issue further towards war. The leaders need to exercise restraint so tensions in this region won't increase any further, because this could have very serious consequences for the countries in this region.
It will definitely increase violence, but I fundamentally do not agree with violence and conflict. I believe people moving towards peace and negotiation to reach their goal is way better.
Well, those are some of the views from the streets of Tehran. Let's speak now to Kashan Naji from BBC Persian. This man was presumably well known to everyone in Iran. He was a face, a figure that was on billboards. He was a known celebrity.
He was to some extent, in the sense that he wasn't a very public person. You never saw him on television holding forth. He didn't say a lot whenever he was in meetings that you saw being filmed on television. He had a presence, obviously. He managed to have personal relations with some of the leading hardliners in the region. He had good network of people in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen, in all sorts of places. And he was a military strategist and also a foreign policy point man for the hardliners, for the regime in Iran. He actually led the foreign policy of Iran in the region rather than Mr. Zarif, who led the foreign policy elsewhere.
So was he effectively the number two to the supreme leader?
He was, as far as policy in the region goes, yes. As far as Iran's efforts to project power in the region, he was the point man. He was the man who led that strategy, and he did it successfully as far as the hardliners are concerned. He managed to arm and organize various militias. He turned around the war in Syria. He was instrumental, very effective in stopping ISIS from taking over Baghdad. If you remember, in 2014, there were, at one point, ISIS was on. They were on the gate of Baghdad. Baghdad was about to fall. And he flew to Baghdad. He organized these militias around the northern perimeter of Baghdad and saved the capital of Iraq from ISIS. So he was responsible for that. In terms of Syria, he managed to, my understanding is that he actually went to Moscow. He met with President Putin, and he convinced him that Russia should come in the war in Syria and operate as an air force for the militiamen that Qasem Soleimani managed to organize and unleash in Syria, and it worked, that strategy. They managed to turn that around. So yes, he was a big man in terms of Iran's foreign policy in the region.
Under immense pressure now, Tehran will be to respond to this. What are the options?
It has to, well, they're already saying that there will be a big revenge, and I suppose it's a question of dignity of the hardliners and the regime, that they have to maintain some kind of, they have to save face, they have to react in a way that is proportionate, is big, but they, I suppose, as we speak, there is a meeting of Supreme National Security Council chaired by Iran's supreme leader, which is the first ever that he actually chairs that meeting of the top officials and leaders of the country, plus all the military leaders. So they are discussing that. I would have thought the first thing to watch is what happens outside the US embassy in Baghdad. I'm sure the pro-Iranian militias and their supporters have plans there, probably. And then Iran will look for some kind of a reaction, probably sort of immediately, some immediate sort of attack somewhere, Saudi Arabia in the Gulf, something. But the bigger revenge will wait. They will take their time and they choose their place.
Okay, Dasra Najib, thank you very much. So let's just remind ourselves how we got to this point. Just have a look at the timeline of events over the past few days. On the 27th of December, that's more than 30 rockets were fired at an Iraqi military base, and a US contractor was killed. 4 American and 2 Iraqi servicemen were wounded. US officials blamed an Iranian-backed militia, Kata'ib Hezbollah, although they denied responsibility. In response, the US launched airstrikes in Iraq and Syria, targeting the bases of the Iranian-backed militia. 25 fighters were reportedly killed. Then, on New Year's Eve, on the 31st of December, a crowd, angered by the strikes, marched on the US embassy, breaching the reception area and setting one perimeter on fire. It led to US troops firing tear gas to repel them. The Pentagon said General Soleimani approved the attacks on the embassy. Which brings us to today, when a drone strike hit the 2 cars carrying Mr. Soleimani, General Soleimani, and several officials with Iranian-backed militias as they were leaving the Baghdad International Airport. Well, with me again, Fawaz Jeje is Professor of International Relations at the LSE, the London School of Economics, and the author of Making the Arab World. Let's just take a pause, Fawaz. We've been talking about the likely consequences of this. Is there anyone in the world who can actually de-escalate what is happening now?
No, I don't think there is one particular person in the world. There are several channels that have been trying to de-escalate. There's the Omani channel, there is the President Macron's channel, and the Japanese channel. I mean, I think there's a way out, there's a path out. We know what needs to be done. The Iranian economy is bleeding. It has had some major impact inside Iran itself. Iran, before the US sanctions in 2018, was producing about 2 million barrels of oil. Iran now is down to only 200,000. The French and the Omanis have been talking about increasing the export of oil to 1 million barrels as opposed to 2 million barrels. So the question is, will President Trump, will this particular escalation serve as a catalyst for both powers, Iran and the United States, to climb down from the tree? So far, I would argue that escalation appears to be the dominant pattern.
But Iran cannot afford an all-out frontal confrontation.
You're absolutely correct. Any particular direct confrontation with the United States will be devastating to Iran. We know the power that the United States has, a massive military machine. And the Iranians now have learned in the past few days what the US military machine can do. But Iran can do a great deal of damage. Iran is a critical, pivotal power. It has expanded near and far. It is the most powerful nation in Iraq, the most powerful nation in Lebanon, in Syria, in Yemen. It has proxies. It has also a very potent lethal machine. Remember, the attacks on the Saudi Aramco companies in Saudi Arabia just a few weeks ago. In one stroke, Iran was able to shatter the deterrence posture in the region. I think what we're seeing now is the shadow war between the United States and Iran turning into a direct war. And wars happen not because either side wants war. They happen by miscalculation. Yourself, you've said it today in the past 20 minutes. It seems to me that both sides are miscalculating the action, the intentions of each other.
We know about the Iranian proxies in the region, Hezbollah, for example, in Syria, and specifically in Iraq. What are the potential dangers here for that country, which has had so much US and Western blood spent on it?
I mean, we're talking about the United States and Iran. We hardly mention Iraq, the poor country. I mean, think of how many wars Iraq has witnessed since 1980. And Iraq now is only a battlefield, a theater, whereby the geostrategic powers, Iran and the United States, are really fighting a proxy war. And in a way, this really particular escalation threatens the very survival of the Iraqi government. And my take on term is that the American military footprint will likely become untenable in Iraq. The Iraqi government will come, and you'll see in the next few days, major, massive anti-American presence, and the Iraqi government will feel the need to tell the Americans to reduce their military footprint in the region.
Thomas Zhezhej, for now, thank you very much indeed. You're watching live with Tim Wilcox. So we'll have more on this developing story here on BBC World News throughout the day. Plenty more on the website as well. Stay with us. You're watching BBC World News. So let's get more now on our main story, the killing of the senior Iranian general Qasem Soleimani in a targeted drone strike at Baghdad International Airport. It was at the hands of the US military, ordered by Donald Trump. Well, General Soleimani was Iran's most senior military commander, running an elite unit, the Al-Quds unit, in Iran's Revolutionary Guards. Here's a little of what we know about him. He was a secretive but charismatic man, but he led the elite force, the Black Ops Force, the Quds Force, since 1998, starting off as a reclusive leader, directing covert operations abroad. He went from barely being recognised to achieving celebrity-like status in Iran. General Soleimani was widely seen as the second most powerful figure in Iran, behind the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, to whom he answered directly. He had extensive experience on the military front line, most recently in Iraq, where he led Iraqi and Shia militias and helped them recapture the city of Tikrit from the so-called Daesh Islamic State. In neighbouring Syria, he is the man who came up with the strategy that helped President Bashar al-Assad recapture key cities and towns from rebel fighters. The killing is controversial for many reasons, including the fact that General Soleimani actually supported the United States in their fight against the Taliban and Islamic State and Daesh by handing over military intelligence. Let's cross live, though, to our correspondent Lina Sinjab now, who joins us from Beirut, because General Soleimani, of course, ran Hezbollah, or directed Hezbollah, which has a strong presence where you are. Well, what is the reaction there today?
Well, there is also outrage and anger by Hezbollah. The leader of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, issued a statement giving condolences for the killing of Qasem Soleimani and called him as a martyr, and also called that all resistant fighters in the region and in Iraq should be prepared for retaliation. Qasem Soleimani has not only a role here in Lebanon but across the region. He manned and designed the strategy of controlling their forces in Syria, in Lebanon, in Iraq, in Yemen. So he is a man who has gone beyond the power inside Iran to shape cities and countries in the region. The reaction is going to be massive to this big blow to Iran, is this power now, and the whole region is on alert to see what's going to happen and how Iran is going to respond to this killing.
Because this man, of course, was in charge of military operations in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen. He had his fingers in many pies, didn't he? And where you are, one of the potential flashpoints for any aggressive response to this killing.
It's really hard to see what's the reaction now, but everything is expected now. Hezbollah is one of the biggest allies for Iran in Lebanon, and they've also had lots of attacks by Israel inside Syria in the past several years of the Syrian war. Israel has targeted both military bases for Hezbollah and for Iran, and it's an easy target for Hezbollah also to launch attacks against Israel if that's the reaction that Iran wants. So all options are up in the air at the moment of what's going to happen. Israel, for sure, is also is going to watch closely and be on alert, because they know exactly, unlike what the Americans did, that this is a big red line for Iran, and the reaction could be massive.
What are the consequences politically, potentially, within Lebanon as well, bearing in mind the sectarian issues and problems, the fact you haven't had a stable government there for a long time, and Rafik Hariri, former Prime Minister, of course, is close to Saudi Arabia, which is part of that opposition to, as they would describe it, the Shia crescent.
Yes, indeed. I mean, Lebanon, the streets in Lebanon have been revolting for months now, since October, against the government. They managed to topple the government of Saad al-Hariri, but because of the sectarian divide, they have to have a government where all factions can approve on. They have nominated one prime minister recently who many say is close to Hezbollah, but still he's not able to form a government that everyone approves, especially the streets. And this blow today is going also to shift Hezbollah's focus on what Iran wants from Hezbollah at the moment in terms of reaction. But it's certainly going to shed heavy light on the situation in Lebanon, especially economically, where the government and the banking system is hit hard by the economic situation. And this is going to be having massive implications, not only in Lebanon, but across the region.
And the fact that he should have been targeted today on a Friday, the day of prayers, will that just exacerbate emotions, do you think?
I think this is definitely the case as well across their followers and across, the Shia community in the Arab world. But also, let's remind our viewers as well that the street in Iraq has revolted against the Shia control, and also revolted against Iran. They've attacked the Iranian embassy. So this is also coming to be a big blow to the protesters, the ones who wanted a real change in Iraq, especially the youth who took to the streets in thousands. So having Qasem Soleimani killed in Iraq is going to also be a blow to all the peaceful protesters inside Iraq. And, their call for change will be on hold probably for a long time.
Okay. Lina Sinjar, thank you very much indeed. Let's get another viewpoint from Iran, though, now. Hanbal Narderi is the political editor of Kayhan, conservative newspaper, told us that the killing of General Soleimani posed a real threat now to the whole region.
This is uncharted territory, I'm surprised, but it is going to escalate the already dangerous situation in the Middle East, not just in Iraq, or Syria or Yemen, but throughout the whole volatile region. Iran didn't want this. Iran didn't ask for this. Trump began this new escalation by walking out of the nuclear deal and imposing crippling sanctions against Iran, and he is going to be held responsible for the consequences of this terrible act that happened a couple of hours ago. Of course, yesterday the Iranian leader made it absolutely clear that Iran was not behind the attack on the American embassy or the consulate or the person that got killed by a mortar attack. So I think they should take it very seriously when the leader says we were not behind those attacks. Unfortunately, the Trump administration didn't care. We know that this is not just about the attacks, it's also about Trump administration doing everything they can to score political points ahead of the presidential elections. We know that Trump is under immense pressure because of impeachment that is going on by the Democrats, and he's trying to find a way out of the current situation. So why not start a new, conflict in the Middle East, in Iraq, and make sure that the Americans will now look the other way and not to the problem that is already making a lot of political issues inside the American soil. So this is not about the attacks. This is also about in the domestic politics in the United States. The political situation, the economic situation inside the Iranian soil is also terrible. The government, the establishment, they all want a way out of the current situation. So why not playing the same game that the American administration is now playing. So I think at the end of the day, we are going to lose. The Americans are going to lose, and many innocent lives are going to be lost in yet another unnecessary conflict in the Middle East. I think we need adults in the room. I think both sides need to go to their senses that escalation and conflict is not the way forward. They need to talk to each other. They need to speak to each other and make sure that we won't see another conflict in the Middle East. We have no other choice. We need to talk to each other. We need to start some kind of dialogue, because the situation is already dangerous. It is going to get out of hand. We are going to see more actors involved in another conflict. And why not come to our senses and realize that we are going to lose both of us. There is no winner in this new conflict.
That was Gambar Naderi, the political editor of Kayhan, a conservative paper in Iran. Let's just pull together some of the international reaction to this killing of General Soleimani today. Here's our news correspondent Mark Lebel, who's with me now. We haven't heard directly from President Trump yet, apart from just that Stars and Stripes flag, but who have we heard from?
Yeah, well, Tim, as you'd expect, in the hours after such a high-profile killing, there's been a mixture of nervousness and hawkishness from around the world. I mean, from Iran's ally, Syria, there's condemnation. Its foreign ministry has called it a treacherous, criminal American aggression. Syria blames the US for instability in Iraq and said this attack constituted a serious escalation. The Iraqi Prime Minister, Adel Abdel Ahmadi, said what he called an assassination violated the conditions of the US's military presence in Iraq. Now, we've just heard that there are calls to expel foreign troops from Iraq by an Iranian-backed Iraqi militia commander. So very worrying for American, British and other troops in Iraq. But one of the most influential Shia clerics in Iraq, Ali Sistani, has called on all parties to behave with self-restraint and act wisely, so trying not to fan the flames there from a Shia voice. Iran's ally Russia has issued this statement from their foreign ministry. They say, "We view the murder of Soleimani by a US strike as a reckless step that will lead to a rise in tension in the whole region. Soleimani loyally served the cause of defending Iran's national interests. We express sincere condolences to the Iranian people." And China, just on the subject of Russia and China, I mean, a major buyer of Iranian oil, as you know, and a UN Security Council member, they've asked for restraint on both sides. So people who aren't directly involved really do want to see this come down. But one sign that it might not is the leader of the Iranian-backed militant group Hezbollah, as you just mentioned, has already called on his fighters to exact just punishment, and Iran's foreign minister backing up those sentiments, saying these attacks would only strengthen resistance against the United States and Israel.
I suppose the point is, Mark, isn't it, that so many conflicts in the Middle East and indeed around the world are now proxy wars and have been fought by people who are being supported either by a Sunni or a Shia, so Iran or Saudi Arabia or Gulf states as well. Of course, add to the mix of all of this, Israel, which has now opened back channels with Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states as well in the fight against Shia Islam, Shia crescent as they'd understand it. What have we heard from Bibi Netanyahu, under huge domestic pressure at home, of course, but standing again?
Well, that's right. He was just on a trip to Greece and he's cut that short to return home because, of course, America has launched this attack. Whether they consulted Israel or not, we don't know yet. But the fact is that in terms of proximity to Iran, Israel's going to be feeling the heat rapidly. And in fact, there's a heightened state of alert there. We're waiting to hear from the Prime Minister, who, as I said, is dashing back home now. Also in the firing line to any response, there could be any of America's allies, as I said, in Iraq or around the world. Now, we've heard from the UK Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab. He says, "We have always recognised the aggressive threat posed by the Iranian Quds Force led by Qasem Soleimani. Following his death, we urge all parties to de-escalate. Further conflict is in none of our interests." And kind of sentiments expressed too by the French Foreign Minister Amélie de Montchalin. She described the killing as what France had feared. She said that tensions between the US and Iran are increasing. That was the direction they didn't want it to go in, and she said the priority now will be to stabilise the region. She hinted that French officials will make high-level contacts, possibly the president, with senior players in the region. And of course, there's been opposition to the killing inside the US as well, from two Democratic presidential candidates speaking out. The former Vice President Joe Biden saying President Donald Trump had tossed a stick of dynamite into a tinderbox and we could be on the brink, he warns, of a major conflict. And the presidential candidate Elizabeth Warren saying that while General Soleimani was a murderer, the decision to kill him was a reckless move.
Okay, all right, Mark, with just some of the international reactions so far. Thank you very much indeed, Mark Lobell. Let's find out what all this has done in business to the price of oil and gold. Our business correspondent, Samir Hashmi, joins us now live from Dubai. A big spike, certainly in the oil price initially. Where are we now?
A big spike, and Tim, it's still climbing as we speak. I was just checking Brent oil, which is one of the main benchmarks, is up by 4.5%, $3.5 really. It was hovering around $69.5. So clearly there is a lot of volatility. People have been are worried about oil prices going ahead, but it's not just oil prices. Even the stock markets have reacted. As soon as this news came in, the S&P, which is the US stock market, the main benchmark over there, immediately fell by 1.1%. European stocks have taken a hit. Asian stocks also went down. And gold prices, on the other hand, have gone up, because usually what happens is that when people start pulling out money from equities and stock markets, they put it in gold, which is considered a more safe asset. Now, and even the currencies, whether you talk about the sterling or the Asian currencies, they all have taken a hit. So clearly there is volatility and concern as far as the business world goes, whether stock markets, currencies, bonds, and oil price, especially because the immediate impact will be on oil prices. We saw, Tim, in September, when the Saudi Aramco, the Saudi oil company, their facility was attacked. Oil prices shot up immediately, but then in the following days it stabilized because there was no reaction from the US or Saudi Arabia, even though the United States blamed Iran for those attacks, but Iran has denied it till date. But this time analysts are saying that given this operation that has been carried out, there could be a reaction from Iran which could really threaten oil supply, global oil supply, and that would have an impact on oil prices in the next few days.
In terms of a threat, perhaps, of more an escalation of conflict. Just elsewhere, what about gold? Traditionally a safe haven. Have we seen a jump there?
Yes, gold has seen a sudden spike going immediately as soon as the news came in. A lot of investors started buying gold. Gold has always been considered a safe haven, especially in times of conflict. We've seen that even in the past, whenever there has been tension in the Middle East, or even when the US-China trade war escalated, gold prices went up. In fact, in last year, gold prices saw one of the highest surges, if you look at the yearly charts, because of the US-China trade war. So clearly, gold could continue to continue to go up. But I think the bigger concern, as far as business analysts are concerned, are going to be oil prices, because that could remain volatile going ahead, and especially depending on how Iran reacts. And just to give you, just to extend on that point, Tim, we have seen in the past that whenever there has been tension between Iran and the United States, it's really played out. We saw what happened in Saudi Arabia, but it's also played out in this water body called the Strait of Hormuz, which is this narrow passage of water which connects the Persian Gulf to the rest of the world. And this passage essentially exports, or 1/3 of daily oil supply that passes through a sea, passes through this passage, 21 million barrels of oil. And in the past, we have seen that Iran has attacked some foreign vessels here, including British vessels that were, and one from Norway which was carrying oil. So clearly, one of the worry for analysts is that if Iran attacks, this could be one of the options of attacking foreign vessels, oil vessels that pass through this passage. And in the past, Iran has threatened to block this passage, which could immediately have an impact on oil prices.
Okay, Samir Hashmi in Dubai. Thank you very much. Let's just take you to some pictures we're getting in live now from Kerman in Iran, the birthplace of General Soleimani. The scene at Friday prayers, several hundreds, as you can see, taken to the streets there, shouting and chanting about the targeted killing, the assassination of the general in the past few hours at Baghdad International Airport. Iran has promised revenge for the killing of him and several other members of a militia he was travelling with from Baghdad International Airport. There's also been severe condemnation in Iraq and from Russia as well, of the killing of a man who was a low-key by his own terms, but a very charismatic and sort of national hero really in Iran. It wasn't so much what he said, but what he had done from the Iran-Iraq war back in the 1980s as a military commander, and had been very much the architect of Iranian influence in the region ever since, in particular more recently in Syria and Iraq as well. The consequences of this military action still waiting to be seen in terms of retaliation, but pressure will be immense on Tehran to react in some way. But these pictures live from Kerman, the birthplace of General Qasem Soleimani, killed in Iraq at Baghdad International Airport at the age of 62. Now, since that news broke, of course, the BBC has been interviewing several key players in the Middle East, and my colleague Simon Pusey spoke to the retired US Ambassador Robert Ford. Now, he worked in the American Embassy in Baghdad for 4 years at the height of the Iraq War, and then served as a US Ambassador to Syria. This is part of what he had to say.
President Trump will have huge political support for this here in the United States. I don't think anyone will come out strongly against him, and we will have to wait and see for the reaction in Iraq.
Yeah, absolutely. What does this mean for what was already a very fragile relationship between Iran and the US?
Well, obviously it's an American escalation. I've been reading commentary on Twitter and Facebook tonight, and a lot of people are worried that war is going to break out immediately between Iran and the United States. I'm skeptical of that. First, the Iranians know that militarily the Americans have preponderance. And second, the Iranians actually are pretty careful. They think things through. They're patient, much more patient than Americans, and they move deliberately. And so I wouldn't expect the Iranians to necessarily strongly react in the next few days. My guess is they're going to sort of weigh options and think a little bit before their next move.
And is it your analysis, would you see a direct link? It's obviously very early to sort of speculate, but a direct link between those attacks on the US Embassy a few days ago and what we've seen in the last few hours?
Well, I think there's just a steady escalation that's going up. You know, the attack on the American Embassy and the Iranian attack on the American position up near Kirkuk on December 27th. This is all part of an ongoing tit for tat. There's been bombing of Iranian-backed militias in Syria going on for months now. The Iranians hit an oil facility in Saudi Arabia. They've harassed shipping in the Persian Gulf. This has been going on for a long time, and this is one more step in that back and forth, that confrontation. But this is, no one should have any question, this is a big step. To kill Qasem Soleimani, one of the most influential people in the Middle East, that is no small thing. And the Iraqi who died with him, Mohandes, was also a very important figure in Iraqi politics.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned Qasem Soleimani there. If he has been killed, what does that mean for the IRGC Quds Force and Iranian-backed militias? Will they respond, do you think?
Well, I think they'll certainly start thinking about it. I don't know if they had contingency plans. I'm not sure they're that sophisticated. They might be, they might not be. But there will be other commanders. I mean, that's the thing about a state-sponsored terrorist organization like the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps' Quds Force. The Iranian state will continue to back it, and there will be a new leader. But Soleimani had the job for decades and had built up a network of people and people who knew him, people he liked to work with, people who liked to work with him. He was hugely respected among the Iraqi, Lebanese, and Syrian militias with whom he worked. You would see selfies of him out on the front lines against ISIS. I mean, this was a guy who had lots of blood on his hand, but I'll give him credit for being courageous. And so replacing somebody like him will not be easy.
And does this news surprise you? You worked in the US Embassy in Baghdad, or does this really fit sort of Trump foreign policy?
I think for a long time the Americans would have been happy to put Qasem Soleimani out of business. He was responsible for the death of hundreds of American soldiers. I think 600 is the figure the U.S. government came out with tonight. 600 American soldiers during the Iraq War when I was there. Frankly, he killed, his organizations killed British personnel in Iraq as well. I'm thinking in particular of several British financial experts, civilians at the Iraqi Ministry of Finance who were kidnapped and murdered. So I'm happy to see him out of business. I just think that sooner or later the Iranians will react, and I hope we are ready for it. And I hope, especially for the sake of Iraq, that the worst does not happen and we don't see widespread fighting in Iraq itself.
Former US Ambassador Robert Ford to Iraq, and a man who, of course, has spent many years in that region as well. You're watching BBC World News. Let's just take you back to Iran. Iran TV broadcasting these pictures live from Kerman, the birthplace of General Qasem Soleimani, the 62-year-old leader of Al-Quds force, the Black Ops force, answerable directly to the Iranian Supreme Leader Khomeini. And Friday prayers here and demonstrations taking place against the assassination, the targeted killing in a drone attack at Baghdad International Airport a few hours ago. The consequences of this action by Donald Trump as yet to be seen, but it's difficult to overstate just what an escalation and how significant the killing of General Soleimani is in terms of the Middle East and the proxy wars fought between Iran and the Gulf states and America and Israel in the region. Bibi Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, has cut short a visit to Greece and is returning home. Plenty more to come, of course, here on BBC World News and on the website. From me, Tim Wilcox and the team.